Hello, welcome to the Pugcast. It's good to have you here for this episode, and we are in different parts of the country, but Tom is in the middle of a blizzard back east, so we're hoping that we get through this show without him losing power. But I'm C.R. Wiley, I'm a pastor, and I serve a church right outside Portland, Oregon, and I'm a senior editor at Touchstone Magazine. Glenn, tell us about yourself.
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a retired history professor, writer, freelance speaker, and a whole bunch of other odds and ends.
Okay, great. Tom, introduce yourself and take us into the topic of the day. It's your show.
Okay. I am Tom Price. I teach theology, Christian ethics at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and I serve a local church here in Connecticut, where we're getting blizzard, fresh blizzard. Yeah. So our topic today is going to be something quite disturbing and interesting, as many of our topics are. And so it derives from a recent First Things article that some of you may have seen called Zombie Bioethics. And the article is written by a Christian bioethicist and psychiatrist, Aaron, I think it's Kheriaty is how you spell his last name. And we can put the article details in the show notes. And one of the things he's discussing is that it is almost becoming a real possibility in modern medicine and research for some things that are simply downright disturbing and quite creepy. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. But it's worth noting that at the outset that not only are we developing technologies in the name of transhumanism, which Chris has been writing on, Glenn and I have talked about quite a bit, and done some things with. But we know that the end result of that often is technologies that are dehumanizing in their consequences, if not, replacing human beings altogether, finding ways to alter them or transcend them, oftentimes that like taking away the importance of work, something fundamental to them, that you end up losing something central to being human. But a lot of the work being done in the medical fields is also in the name of all kinds of good motives and ends, leading to radically disturbing and dehumanizing consequences. And it has really been so intense that medicine now has even altered its self-understanding in the West in particular, from what we can talk about a little bit later, the Hippocratic emphasis to this new utilitarian. It's not really new, but it has increasingly taking over the mindset of medical technology besides regular technology. So with this article, Kheriaty is addressing several medical researchers that put together an article in, let me see if I have it with me, in MIT Technology Review. And we'll probably put that in the show notes too. And the title is worth mentioning of the article. It's called Ethically Sourced Spare Human Bodies That Could Revolutionize Medicine.
Well, there you go. That's pretty unnerving. Yeah.
Unnerving. And the sub part of it, go ahead.
They're using that word ethical. I don't think it means what they think it means.
That's right. And listen to the next part of that's in very small print of the title. Human bodyoids could reduce animal testing, improve drug development, and alleviate organ shortages. So there's your utilitarianism, but it's right in the title. And this is by a Karsten Charlesworth, Henry Greeley, and Hiromitsu Nakauchi, I believe you pronounce that. And they are probably definitely bioethicists and medical researchers themselves. I haven't had enough time to dig into everyone's background. But that's the article that spawned Aaron Kheriaty to write the Zombie Bioethics review. Yeah. And so what he's basically looking at is he's referring to this article where medical research and technology is getting to the point where it can create, or hopes to be able to create, basically healthy human bodies, but without the neurological system, without consciousness, without being able to feel pain or be aware of any pain without being able to think at all or be aware of it. So at the embryonic level, probably reprogramming so that as they develop, they don't develop into sentient beings, but they are otherwise fully healthy bodies. And their argument is, well, since in some sense they aren't human in the way that we're human, they're not even animal in the sense that animals are usually conscious of pain. They would be, at least in their imagination, free of this. And so they could be used ethically in a whole host of different kinds of things that we're having, problems in the field of medicine, basically accomplishing.
Sure.
We need organs for transplant, and there's a lot of complications with that. There's a shortage, the problems of having to do it right as someone's dying, the temptation to allow people that would have a prolonged death to be euthanized so their body parts can be used to save 5 people. I mean, there are all kinds of utilitarian goods, but this is sort of the initial start, reasoning, and this is the initial. So bodyoid is what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, this reminds me of science fiction tropes, and by the way, everything that is happening has been envisioned in some science fiction story, whether it's in film or on television or in books. So there's. In one sense, this is all new, but in another sense, there's nothing new under the sun. And I do think that science fiction authors have had a prophetic role in the last couple of 100 years. It used to be that they were dismissed as kind of, I don't know, not genuine sort of literary talents. They were, providing just pulp fiction trash for kids, but all of the people in Silicon Valley who are doing creepy stuff seem to have been inspired by them, but they never seem to kind of get the message that was often present in the stories, which is don't go there.
It's something that showed up on my Facebook memories. It applies, even though it's not the exact context. It's a quote from Lyndon Baines Johnson. You do not examine legislation in the light of the benefits it will convey if properly administered, but in the light of the wrongs it would do and the harms it would cause if improperly administered.
Well, LBJ is not known for his wisdom, but that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, well, he's also not known for his ethics, but let's be real here. But he makes a really good point about legislation, and I think it also applies to technology.
I think that's right.
And this is the thing, we're arriving at the time where potentials are starting to be actualized that, again, they were actualized in the imaginations of scientific writers because, you can think through imaginatively certain consequences that if we were able to get to the place where we could allow this to happen, they could be imagined. And then there's a certain amount of moral breakdown that has to happen also in the imagination of the science fiction writer to imagine what it would look like for a world to ready itself for that.
Yeah. Well, getting to that point, sort of the readiness, I think that we find ourselves unable to appreciate the value of taboos. We tend to dismiss those as, I don't know, unrational or superstitious, and in so doing, we don't even give any sort of attention to what maybe is at work in the taboo that's intended to preserve something of great worth. That maybe people have lost sight of how the taboo does that, but they still at least observe the taboo and in the process end up preserving this thing of value.
That's right. Taboo on a certain level is expressing, a deeply intuitive grasp of reality boundaries and natures. It's another way of discerning, not just through reason, not just through experience, but in a very, I don't even know what the best way of putting it, but a very human way of even as a group, being able to recognize this and being able to preserve it and to discern it. And I think that's one of the things we're losing, is that discerning capacity. It goes with other things. And so we used to certain taboos were discerned by a group of people. Even if, we'll learn with the Hippocratic community committed to certain convictions, they could definitely find areas that were just no-go zones, and that was taboo to medicine. You don't even consider it. The science fiction writer might for an imaginative story, but not someone doing that, which may be a good way to step into what the specifics are of this issue by going at it from the changes that have happened in medicine, the changes from the Hippocratic emphasis to this utilitarian medicine. Glenn, you were going to...
Yeah, just before we get off of the idea of taboos, I forgot who it was, but there's at least one prominent thinker who argues that civilizations are defined by their taboos.
Right.
Where the boundaries are in terms of acceptable behavior and what you can and cannot do and what is legitimate and illegitimate, those are the things that really define a civilization. And right now, we are in the process of decivilizationizing or something ourselves by effectively eliminating all taboos on pretty much anything.
Right. This touches a little bit on Carl Trueman and his concerns about desecration, and Philip Reef and death works and all of that.
They are definitely on to what has now pretty much happened in any arena in which research, education, thought, cultural entertainment, everything. You look at modesty levels, all of those things are no longer, even for women who usually would be kind of put a gate around certain kinds of immodesty for what it communicated and the various taboos bound up with it. And then, of course, now people are even breaking them down beyond just kind of alternative family to where justifying things like incest and everything else. It's disturbing where things that used to be fundamental just are not. You usually could see it maybe just in one or two kind of episodes revealed every so often that you just knew were depraved, to where people argue for its normalcy and untroubled by it, and that is what is happening in medicine. And I think at least according to Kheriaty and I would say very similarly, and we've said the same, is something in the utilitarian disposition that moves away from essences and natures and what's good for them, and a focus even on the particulars that share in those universals, which have boundaries around that require us to do justice to certain kind of things and not injustice. Once that's gone, and it opens up to things like we try to figure out in the trolley problem and ethics and things like that, it really does become. It opens the door to a lot. And so one of the things he does in some other works, Kheriaty, he's I've looked into some of the things he's talked about, and he's part of a lot of these good groups. One of them's called the Hippocratic Society, which I didn't realize was they're not necessarily all conservative thinkers, but they're sort of like the Federalist Society, but in medicine, they're retrieval of the classic Hippocratic and the contributions of kind of Abrahamic faiths, Christianity in particular, to medicine and the commitment to life. And they're against abortion, they're against euthanasia, they would be against these things. And it's a growing society that is aware of where alternative new medicine is taking things. And they likewise are starting to become groups committed to preserving and protecting classic medicine and practicing it. And, it's a retrieval group, but they are also trying to at least supply alternative to where things are going. But one of the things is the traditional view, as he puts it, is doctors should do no harm to especially healthy bodies or healthy people, and even to bodies that aren't healthy, they shouldn't be doing harm. They should be healing in accord with what healing is for that kind of nature, body. And they should prioritize also each patient's individual good. And this was one of the things that we hoped for. It never was perfect, but whether you're poor or rich, illness can fall on anyone. And the place you want to be able to go to and trust who is helping you, because they have a huge advantage and power over you. They could do serious harm if applied improperly. So break that trust down and that goodwill, and you really have a problem. And we've already seen, I think the COVID and vaccines really revealed one of the utilitarian takeovers of that. But you've really seen that shift. And so in the way he puts it, in the shift has really moved away from the emphasis on the good of the patient, which is interesting. He mentions, one of the things he mentions, something I forgot, is that, medicine, taking care of the physical body, is one of the core classical professions, right?
Right.
Along with law, along with being a minister or a priest, and so they were professions because you had to make a public profession for that you're committed to this good, so that they could be institutions of trust. And so one of the things that starts to become lost with this utilitarian emphasis is it moves into a broader set of social goals rather than the health of the individual or the healthy body. And so basically you can see the emphasis shifts. And the emphasis now is not so much loyalty to the patient and their good, but a new role starts to develop even for the physician, where if you look at it just in examples, you can see now that there is a rise of doctor-assisted suicide or euthanasia, right? Helping a person die with dignity, a healthy body in a lot of cases. We saw this tragic example of a 26-year-old in Canada who he suffered with diabetes and had depression. And during a depressive episode, which is not uncommon, he wanted out. And during this phase, he sought help, and they helped him. That's not the time to be making those decisions.
The irony of having a suicide hotline and MAID, medical assistance in dying, the irony of having both of those things in the same environment is just bizarre.
Yeah.
But I want to actually just take a step back and ask what healthcare is. It seems to me that a proper definition of healthcare is restoring a body, to the degree it's possible, restoring the body's natural functions.
Yeah.
Now, in abortion and euthanasia, you are actually, for the mother in abortion, you are thwarting the body's natural function and you are killing the child. Euthanasia, you're killing. Those are the only two medical procedures which, if properly carried out, result in the death of someone.
Yes.
Right. And then the other one is trans.
Yeah.
These trans things are fundamentally about preventing the body from functioning normally.
That's right.
So in what sense can you even call that healthcare?
Right. That's the change to definition, and that's kind of what he's getting to is the things that are changing the relationship and the role of the doctor to assisting with what they call death. He puts it. Also, they become bidders of the pharmaceutical industry, where it's not necessarily what's good for the patient; it's what's good for the profits of themselves or their funders, or the larger political group that is basically making decisions for medicine to have to follow or pressuring them. You have this kind of the for-profit surgeries. And this is one of the things he says now it's opened up basically if the technology, if it's feasible and you have the technology and someone's willing to pay for it, they're obligated to do it. And both for the funding and everything else, but also they're not supposed to be able to tell someone who wants to alter healthy body parts that they're not allowed to do it if they're willing to pay for it and they want it done. And they are literally chopping up healthy body parts and altering them in the trans case in particular. And so it's very, very, the new medicine basically takes the tools of medical technology, which can be validly used for healing the individual patient, and now is using them for different ends. Right. And even state-sponsored murder. We don't think about it a lot, especially Protestants, because they usually tend to be okay and on board with capital punishment. But on the flip side, should physicians, and to what extent should they be? What extent is that state-sponsored, to which there's the role of those that are doctors should be involved in that? Those are at least questions that can be asked.
One of the things related to the matter you brought up, Glenn, is when it comes to the discussion, what is health, there are a lot of folks who would say that's subjective. There are a lot of people who would say that you shouldn't impose your understanding of health on somebody else, right? Because we've lost any, ability to talk about design or intention or, healthy function. And now it's all about self-actualization and expression. So we've kind of gotten into those waters. But the other thing you bring up, Tom, which is really a distorting force in all of this, is the profit motive. With regard to the healthcare industry. So once upon a time, we didn't speak of healthcare in that way. That's right. a newer development. And it's really almost impossible for people to understand what a professional is, at least as we understand it historically. Today, it means you're paid, which is almost the opposite.
Yes, that's right.
What it once meant,
especially for ministers.
For a lot of us, we didn't get much pay for what we did.
but the idea, though, that a professional athlete is an athlete who's paid, right? Yeah. As opposed to, but the idea that even an athlete would be considered a professional would have been absurd.
That's right.
Saying that just as recently as the 19th century, and it's like you noted, it's you've been entrusted with really valuable truths, skills, knowledge for the benefit of your community. When you're a minister, you proclaim the gospel, you administer the sacraments for the spiritual health of the people that are entrusted to you in your community. If you're a lawyer, right, you are working with the law, and if you're a medical professional, you're a healer. And so, what kind of price tag can you put on any of those things? What is the value of health? What is the value of justice? What is the value of eternal salvation? There is no dollar amount. It doesn't make sense.
That's right.
So historically, we just simply provided honoraria for these valuable professions in order to demonstrate that we really honor those men, in particular, and back in the day, who have been entrusted with these matters. And now, because of the forces of profit making and all of that, we get these distortions. Yes. In every area.
Yes, that's right.
And the Christian ministry is not.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that the public trust in ministers and high end ministers. I mean, we wrestle with it, with bishops. Hands in a lot of cookie jars, or at least charges of it, which do distort what the integrity of what they offer, to where there's a lot of jokes that come about because of it. But similarly, we're seeing this happen. One of the last places you would have expected it would be medicine. I mean, starting to have jokes about whether or not they have your interest at stake in this kind of way.
Well, we just think about the pandemic. As information is finally sort of seeped out, we know that decisions were made not with all of our interests solely in mind, but with the interests of companies and their products and the remuneration that certain, the sort of under the table stuff that was going on with certain people who were entrusted with regulatory power. And so it's all just kind of undermined. Yeah. It's just, there are some people who are still living in denial, of course, and those people still tend to wear masks.
Yeah, that's right.
But it seems like even the slow to come around have finally acquiesced and said, there was just a whole lot of self-dealing going on and all that.
And to look at, one of the things that really gets pushed under the rug with it is just the fact that, in places like China, for example, that aren't regulated outside, it happens outside too, but these viruses are being played with. Technology is playing with these things, can do, and they, it wouldn't be outside of the realm of imaginative possibilities that sinister motives to destroy a lot of people, and they've already found people from China in some of the universities here bringing things in that can be done. And that's another show and everything, but it is something where technology is allowing us to go. And then, it's not out of my realm of imaginative possibilities that it's something could be unleashed to which the profit increase of the only people who have the solution, the vaccine for it, can benefit. Right. And it's sick to think that way. But after the pandemic, it's not out of the imaginative possibilities.
I've heard disturbing rumors, too, about organ harvesting, particularly in China.
China, yes. And this is one of the things, actually, that Kheriaty and some other people have been discussing. One of his colleagues is writing a book. I'll get the name for that. Is writing a book on that in particular, and that gets back to the we will get to bodyoids, but the emerging bioethical technologies that are making this shift from, as you just mentioned, things that were considered in harmony with our human nature and the way they function and the way we can discern their functioning and the kind of ends built into our very bodies, to this changed view. Like you said, there's a changed anthropology, a view of the human in the West. I think psychological man is one of them that imports it. That's where the trans, where if you psychologically feel a certain way in your quote unquote inner self, which would have made no sense prior to the 18th century, really, then that's the real you and not the embodied. And that's already conditioning a world for, the body isn't the real you. It's consciousness, which plays a big role, as we'll see, in what the definition of brain death is, right? Brain death is what it means to be human consciousness. And you can still have a healthy body functioning very well, but if you're brain dead, then you're not considered human or human anymore. And that opens up to the legal problems that are bound up with death, dying, and the body. But there are three that are mentioned here. One is germline gene editing. That is where that differentiates itself from what classically went by the name of somatic gene therapy. That is just treating an individual. To germ line editing is where heritable changes are passed to future generations. So basically, this is where you get into concerns about altering things, re-editing, gene editing, for whatever set of purposes and goals and goods. There is, first of all, no consent from future generations. Right. And there are, of course, the unintended long-term consequences. And then the other is, of course, in vitro gametogenesis, if I say that right. IVG could produce human eggs and sperm from adult cells, opening possibilities for new family structures of reproduction. We've talked about this, but also raising consent and identity issues. Also potential embryo farming and consumer-driven genetic selection, designer babies.
Right. Well, related to that what we're getting at then is the prospect that we could have babies who come into the world without the benefit of a mother, or at least, one in the immediate generation preceding. In other words, if you go further back, of course, there's a mother. But what does that do in so many respects in terms of, for example, I've been doing a lot of work on my family tree, and I noticed something. There's always a man and a woman with every generation. It's just amazing.
It is. Yeah.
What are the odds?
That's right. That's right. Now you have through this in sort of insertion of technical technical manipulation. The prospect of creating a generation without that, and how does that child, and I would think of this child as a victim from day one, relate to the larger sort of human family as a result.
Yeah. The person that I know who's doing the best work on this is Katie Faust. She's got an organization called Them Before Us that is really on the front lines of this issue. The fundamental point being that we've subordinated children's good to parental or to adult wishes.
Right.
And so adult desires have been trumping what is known to be best for children. And these technologies will only make it worse.
Right. I saw something here recently, too, and it was sent along to me by someone on Facebook, a article in Wired, which is an odd place for it to appear considering the nature of it. But it's about kind of what the people in Silicon Valley refer to as the homosexual mafia. Basically, gays have a great deal of power in Silicon Valley, not just because it's San Francisco, but because they own a lot of the companies. They're in charge of a lot of the companies. Everybody from Sam Altman, Tim Cook, you can go down the line, Peter, what's his last name? Anyway, so this, and so it's a very creepy and controlling and clandestine reality there, and some of those people are the people who are helping to fund this kind of stuff.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, we talked about kind of robot wombs. That's one of the ways they conceive of, basically once they produce this, bring them up so detached. But I'm going to get to some kind of, I'm going to put on my my science fiction hat in a moment and start imagining some other things that could come about from this bodyoids, which, again, as he put it, is to create lab-grown human bodies without brains for research or organ harvesting or drug testing, because it's hard on, I understand. We don't want to try drugs, as we often have to, on conscious animals or human beings who need to try it, but there's a lot of risk involved. So again, I understand the desire to kind of not have to do that, but this is going to raise a lot of issues. And one of the things, at least let me give a little more definition to what these bodyoids are understood to be. So a human or human-like body without brains, engineered to be non-sentient but biologically intact. Fully functioning, healthy human body, but apparently no sentience. And they, the people, or the proponents, envision them as potentially an unlimited source of organs and experimental subjects, arguing that using them could avoid the pain ethics associated with both animal and human testing. And some discussions are even creating such beings via stem cell technology and artificial wombs and traditional in vitro growth. So on the one hand, let's say for all those single ladies out there that don't want to have babies physically, they're working, there's maybe single moms, not only single moms, but single moms, professionals, make great incomes, don't want that, but they still want kids, or the gay male couple or female couple that don't want to physically have, well, some can't physically have, obviously, and yet you can basically, pay to have a baby.
So instead of having some third world woman who carries your child and then maybe, it gets out and this an awkward problem, you just have this bodyoid that does it for you.
The bodyoid that does it for free. And then,
except that won't be your child because there's no consciousness, there's no brain.
Yeah. Well, I think, but what if they're able to, if it's a healthy functioning body, for the bodyoid, would it be able to be a womb, a living human womb, yet without being conscious? So eliminates the pain of labor.
Yeah, instead of a plastic one.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So there are some automatic questions that come up this way. How does the body function without at least part of a brain intact? Because the brain controls the body.
Yeah, these are things, that Kheriaty is going to raise. Whether that could even be possible with a human body. The human body is an ensouled body. And
just on the technological level, I mean, you've got a problem there. Now, the other thing is that on the psychological level, children bond with their mothers in utero.
Right.
That is one of the fundamental things that happen. So how do you do that? I mean, this is one of the fundamental problems behind surrogacy.
Yeah.
What do you do with the child bonding to the mother? You've eliminated that completely, unless you want to put in a computer program or something that talks to the baby, plays Mozart for them.
Well, see, this is the interesting thing. Having no this is where my scientific my science fiction imagination goes off. I mean, with the way in which we're creating AI and all of that, why doesn't that become the substitute consciousness implanted in these? So they're almost mimicking human, but more like a real embodied physical human than a robot. And that is more troubling than just a robot being, because what you have is apparently a soulless or consciousness, conscienceless, consciencelessness, if you can say the word. Human, but put with a simulacrum or a AI or whatever in there. And I mean, I'm not saying this is what their goal is, but I'm just saying that the way technologies try to merge and the way in which, sinister thinking and creating a product go together, it wouldn't be far out of their imagination. But one of the things he raises, and I think is worth raising, is first of all, he's challenging their claim that bodyoids are not at least human in some very real sense, because they are real human bodies that are living. And just like we would speak of disabilities, even for those in a coma, you would not, even though they aren't quite the same the way they're being defined, you would see it more as maybe a highly disabled human being, not a. But he says that's where the term zombie comes in. It's almost, for them, these creatures are zombie-like. Kind of, you can.
Well, they use language like a prophylactic. It's a way to sort of like mitigate the sort of the discomfort. Analgesic, maybe another way to put it, to prevent the conscience from rising up in protest. You just sort of like suppress it with language. We've seen it for years with regard to the term fetus as opposed to baby and all that kind of stuff.
So zombie, or in their mind, they're like zombies, that their bodies that we've all seen.
And of course, you can shoot a zombie without any pain of conscience. We've got video games that help us to do that.
You remember Night of the Living Dead? That's what you do to keep them from getting after you. And then of course there is always the what happens if they do come after you.
Well, they're going after your brains. You remember that, right? They want to eat your brains. There's all sorts of weird stuff that goes on in kind of not just science fiction, but in horror, where you actually, in a very sort of I don't know, it's almost like there are certain concerns or like pangs of conscience which are being suppressed, but find ways of expressing themselves nevertheless. Like when you think about the legend of the vampire, the vampiric character of like sucking someone else's blood where the life is contained in order to preserve your own youthfulness. That's not just something that people are, saying, "Ooh, isn't that terrible?" But there's some kind of deep, I guess, discomfort with kind of this impulse that we all have to kind of live at other people's expense. And, that's kind of one way that it gets expressed is through the vampire story.
It does. I think that a lot of those that some people just skip over is that's a horror films just to shriek from. But even in many cases, they are asking these or they're at least creating ways of that. If you think hard about them, they're onto something that we end up dealing with at one way or the other. I mean, all the way back with Frankenstein and these sorts of things.
Right.
Actually, the vampires provide an interesting sideline on this. The original vampires were non-corporeal for the most part, who just sort of suck the life out of you, not physically. but their bodies would remain fresh and all that. That was the theory. And actually, there's some pretty weird stories surrounding that, which we now understand, but they didn't at the time. What ends up getting interesting is, starting probably with Bram Stoker, you start getting an erotic side surrounding vampires, which is the thing that has been progressively pushed further and further and further in the popular imagination surrounding vampires. Right. They're no longer quite the monsters in the same sense that they were. There's something fundamentally sexual about them. Now this is totally off subject, but that particular change is rather interesting in light of the idea of, preserving your youth by sucking the life out of somebody else. Suddenly that is now associated with sex or a whole bunch of other things. I mean, there's something really interesting going on there.
I hate to bring it up, but it's not far outside of the depravity of humanity to turn bodyoids into those kinds of ends.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think there will be a huge industry for something more than robots.
Yeah. Yeah. My mind went there too. Yeah. But I think your comment, Glenn, about the sexual kind of features to the vampire legend, it's chick fiction too. I mean, it's a disturbing thing to consider, but there's an appetite for this with women that doesn't seem to be present with men. I mean, men have their own problems, but for some reason, it's if you look up the vampire stuff, it's all marketed to women. I don't know what to do with that, but it's just a fact.
Well, it's probably the strong pursuit. Guys probably don't want some guy with a cape, or most guys don't, with a bunch of fangs chasing them around. They'll be meeting a group of rednecks very quickly that are worse than vampires.
But getting to the bodyoid thing, what we have here is the reduction of human beings to a particular function, nor our bodies to a particular functional state. But there's also a kind of reduction that fails to appreciate the irreducible complexity of kind of just even our bodies. I mean, you brought it up, Glenn, that there's, in bearing a child, a woman's body is altered, but also there's stuff going on physiologically, not just psychologically, in terms of sort of this really amazing relationship between a woman's body and a child's body, and it doesn't stop at birth; it continues for months. So that being in personal contact, direct contact with the mother's body, is actually part of the final phase of sort of like the child's gestation.
Well, some of the blood of the baby some of the blood of the baby circulates in the mother and vice versa. So what ends up happening is, if the mother is sick, has got, let's say, an issue in her lungs, the stem cells from the child will heal the mother.
Yeah.
And then after birth, when a mother kisses a child, it conveys information through the lips to the mother, who then will, about the baby's state of health, and the breast milk will adjust in accordance with what they find. I mean, it is the level of complexity here that they're only just discovering is absolutely astounding. Yeah. And they think they can do this artificially.
Yeah. Right. And again, that is not necessary. I mean, for them, I think the talk predominantly is the body organs right now. And these are just possibilities that these things could be used for.
Well, I've heard about mechanical wombs. I've heard about that.
Yeah, those are
thinking about.
They are thinking about that in particular, but whether or not they think bodyoids could end up, I mean, I think that, again, that is one of the possibilities. But I think even the ethical justification, first of all, whether or not they lack consciousness is one issue. Secondly, like you said, I have my metaphysical questions on just how much matter is just matter. That's a whole nother issue. And the fact that you never have pure matter, you have formed matter with finality built into it. And the human body is bound up with form and finality, which is bound up with being, which is grounded in ultimate consciousness in the full sense of the word, God, divine mind and purpose. And so that itself means there's a boundary there of that form is not for mere exploitation. And consciousness isn't the boundary line. It's the fact that that embodied form, even materially, is gifted and built in with a boundary of that makes it sacred. This is why there historically was even a sacredness, as you mentioned, to burial, and the sacredness of the way you don't touch a core. All these things that are bound up with those taboos around death that relate very much even to the way you're supposed to take a body and manage it.
And what you're getting into, Tom, is the metaphysical dimensions of our embodiment. And it occurs to me that as these scientific or technological trends continue, that that there's either going to be a real parting of the ways between those of us who intuit these connections to this larger reality and those who don't, or there will be an alteration of the Christian faith. And a adulteration of the Christian faith that will be really it'll be heretical. It'll and it's hard to anticipate how many different ways that could play out. But I do think that it creates a very enormous set of pastoral challenges. So let's say you're 50 years from now, and we've got just a slew of people walking around who are the victims of this stuff. There's that. But then there's just the ongoing challenge evangelistically of proclaiming the gospel to people who, for example, when I was growing up, the task of evangelism could take so many things for granted that you just didn't need to get into, right? You just say, well, we all know there are men and women. We all know that, we're made in the image of God. We all, so there are all these different things that you could just say, well, we don't need to talk about that.
Yeah, that's right.
now it's no, you got to talk about everything. So conversion is not just this narrow sort of thing, have you asked Jesus into your heart kind of stuff. Yeah. Conversion is like, we got to challenge the sort of the larger sort of intellectual and spiritual climate of our world that is self-consciously anti-Christian.
And we have, in a way, a harder task than even the early church did. I'm not saying they didn't have certain things that are harder than what we do. I'm talking about, in particular, what you're talking about, because the Hellenic world and the Jewish world, out of which and into which they went, still had aspects of these in place. Yeah. You still had the place for reason, discerning certain kinds of inherent natures and goods. It became a debate about the best way and who had the fuller picture and who could articulate it. But even the significance of family life, even where you had in Hellenic culture where you did have high levels of promiscuity and there was homosexuality, you still didn't have an undermining of the family. The family was still classically understood predominantly. Yep. And of course, you did have certain devaluation of life and hierarchies of who's worth it or not, even within Judaism for that matter. And Christianity has had to wrestle with that itself, even though its ideals have been, the full image of God in any one human. And I guess that's one of the things issue here, because the image of God is not only our material aspect, but definitely includes it all the way down to male and female. He created them. Then we can't just go along with this. And Christians that do are clearly moving in a Gnostic or transhumanist direction. And yeah, you're right. I mean, you've mentioned it, I think more recently, Chris, and we've talked about it a lot over the years, is that we even in the worlds we're familiar with have certain risks, emphasis on dominion the wrong way, Progressive dominion theology is what led to a lot of these technological moves. And then also kind of certain post-millennial conceptions that are highly immanentized, that it's through all of the ways that we do things, we are going to be the mediums for bringing in the eternal kingdom. And so technology is one of the big things we do. And we've gained mastery and control over so many things through that. And while there is probably a truism there is also the fact that there is the libido dominandi that is still in place from the earthly city, and it's hard sometimes to discern when we're part of the Jerusalem or Babylon.
Right.
Peter Leithart today on his Substack was talking about a sonship. Particularly in the context of the Trinity. And he said, I think he was quoting Hans Urs von Balthasar, he said, oddly enough, theologians have not really talked much about the nature of sonship in the Godhead. And Leithart's argument from this is that our failure to take into account what God the Father and God the Son mean has led to a misunderstanding of, parenthood in this world, and that fundamentally the attack on parenthood that we see is actually an attack on God himself, on the Trinity, on the doctrine of the Trinity, and everything else. It's a rather short piece, but I thought it was extremely interesting and I think extremely relevant to some of the stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah. I get a sense of what he's getting at. I'll have to take a look.
Yeah, and that kind of stuff is von Balthasar was even the emphasis on sonship and form and form, taking Plato's idea but anchoring it in the Son's very form, being the form of the Father, and then being the form that forms all things, in the way in which we do have a kind of stamping of the infinite Father, and therefore we all have stamps of our own Father, and this stuff is definitely there, and it does relate, because when we're talking here about a material bodyoid, we're dealing with the physical aspects of that form and that image, if you want to use that language. And so we can't just say, just because we haven't allowed the sentience to develop, that we aren't still desecrating something sacred.
Yeah. And we also have to deal with the fact, something showed up in my Facebook memories about a kid that was born without most of his brain, who is perfectly functional.
Yeah.
And, so we have to deal with the mind-brain duality here. Just because it doesn't have a brain or the parts of the brain that we think control consciousness doesn't mean it isn't conscious.
That's right. That's right.
I think, too, we really need somebody to do some work, and maybe it's been done and I just don't know about it, on how to talk about ensoulment and consciousness, spirit and consciousness. It's more or less the case in my experience that consciousness, the term, the word, has essentially pressed the terms spirit and soul out of common use.
Yeah.
So people now, when they're talking about anything, whether we're talking about artificial intelligence or human intelligence, the term that's always employed, even by Christians, is consciousness. And I do it,
Yeah.
But how do we distinguish between those two things? Are they just two words for the same thing? Are they different things? That kind of stuff.
And I do think there are huge shades of difference by definitely the way we use them, because we have imported so much of the modern conception of the self into them. Classically, of course, there would definitely be aspects of the thinking the rational natures of us, which will obviously include awareness and consciousness and mental action and discerning and communicating and relationality, all those kinds of things. But it would have been understood predominantly as soul. or spirit, depending on what school of thought, and that, as ensouled bodies, that's kind of one Christian way of reading it. We tend to think very Cartesian, whether we like it or not, even about consciousness, that it's like some kind of ghost in the body. That's what's going on here. It's a ghost in the body. And so if you just you just kind of rid the ghost and you just have a body, you don't have, quote unquote, what is identified with a real self and therefore a real person. So personhood has become, I think, in philosophy, the theologians that have used the language of personhood well, and figures like that, they are trying to retrieve classic meaning. They're trying to use personhood with what would have classically went by soul and spirit, with all goods, but recognizing this element of relational self that's involved there. But that's one of the very things. Questions of personhood and consent are right at the heart of what's troubling here. When human life begins is one, how humans at earliest stages should be treated ethically, but also what counts as a human person.
Right. Another thing, that has been on my mind a lot lately because of artificial intelligence and robotics is the tendency we have to think of the body as a machine. Yeah. So getting back to your point earlier about the ghost in the machine, well, that's referring to our bodies and sort of saying that they're machines.
And they're not.
When we when we think about Scripture, there's other ways of referring to our bodies.
That's right.
Their temples, their clothing.
Yeah.
Let me think. Some other jars. There's this idea that, sort of the material that we're made from, soil, clay, is in some sense our home. It's a dwelling. So we particularly the language of the temple, is a place in which we dwell. Yeah. But it's because of the presence of our spirits or our souls, and that's another conversation. Yeah. That the bodies are temple-like in a sense that they're sacred. Yeah. So they're a sacred space. They're not just stuff.
Yeah, and that's right. And the soul animates them all the way through. And this is why you cannot just say the only part of what the soul is only the consciousness. And this is where, when Glenn's getting to these aspects of our material natures that are doing all this communication to the full formation of a baby, we're dealing with something more than a machine. We're dealing with, and they aren't severable. This is the thing. The reduced human nature is the ensouled body. That's the reduction. It isn't soul. I understand in Christian faith that the soul can be held by God in place until it readies itself for resurrection, after our physical death in the meantime. But nevertheless, the temple is its dwelling place, and in some sense, it isn't at all something complete without it.
Yeah, when you read in Genesis, what it says is that God breathed, it's translated the breath of life, but it's literally the spirit of life. Yeah. Spirit, breath, and all that being the same thing. And man became a living soul. So the living soul is the body plus the spirit.
That's right. Yeah.
And frequently the word soul is translated as life.
Yeah.
When you're reading... whoever would save his life would lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. The word life all the way through there is psyche, soul. Yeah. I mean, so, you can't really divide that up quite so
right.
neatly.
And this is why the life talk, especially in the abortion debate and everything else, is so fundamental. But I think also in the bodyoid case, you're dealing with life here, and that itself is you're dealing with. Now, of course, I understand where they go. Well, you consider an ant life, and you don't have the same level of value. And believe it or not, again, I understand that. I agree there isn't the same level of hierarchy going on here. But on the flip side, I think Christians have been at sometimes the wrong side because they want to avoid being with the radicals on sometimes the environment issue. But I think we're coming to realize that the way we've also stood with technology and the natural environment, and being ready to exploit natures and things beyond merely needs and necessities, and some of the things we're allowed to cultivate, to almost wreaking havoc on, like the destroying a trees in Tolkien. I think we've lost an antenna to tune into the sacredness of life of all created things, and that there is a justice due to everything. I'm not saying it's what the radical environmentalists are saying, but on the flip side, it's also not what the exploiters through technology are saying either. And I think we're awakening to that as well, and that has relevance even to the material dimensions of the human body.
If I can throw one more thing in, I know we're running short on time here. I want to go back to the idea of consciousness replacing soul or spirit. It seems to me that there is a connection between that and the growth of expressive individualism.
Yeah.
So that what you are is what you think you are, and if you're not thinking, you aren't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this is why I think also, I mean, Lightheart's point, von Balthasar's point, is a way of kind of addressing that issue as well. And this is a lot. A lot of modern Trinitarians tended to talk about the Trinity as three different centers of consciousness. Right. That leads into tritheism, and so that again, I think the retrieval of the riches of biblical language and theological language, to having to run that path again is really where a lot of our labor, especially in Christian ethics, is and should be carried out. Some of what I've been doing, and it's not easy. You have to read stuff on body and soul that's very difficult, even in the Platonic worlds and Aristotelian worlds, and even if you can kind of get a hold of their anthropology pretty easy, the stuff and the debates that go into that stuff, and they're significant for Christianity and why Christianity took one path and another, it requires some labor. So the hard work has to be done if we're going to contribute. And I do hope I'm glad to see a lot of people are moving into retrieval work, but I hope this area, I can do my best. We do our best, but definitely generations to come are going to have to run with it hard.
Well, that's a good point to end on. So run hard. Anyway, thanks for listening to this episode of the Theology Pugcast. We hope we've got your mind sort of rolling here a little bit, and you got the juices intellectually churning. But we also hope that you enjoy this show and that it's been a blessing to you. If that's the case and you'd like to help us out, we do have needs when it comes to paying for the show, and there is a link in our show notes to our Patreon account. Please check it out and consider becoming a regular patron. All right, that's enough for now. Thanks a lot, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Theology Pugcast is a ministry of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Battleground, Washington. The Theology Pugcast is produced and edited by Wiley Craft Productions of Nashville, Tennessee.